anytime you go deeper into something, you figure out, oh my God, this isn't what I thought it would be. What were your fears in the sense of, did you have any fears for the first? And if so, what were those?
I think at the end of the day, it was more so just like, is this what I want to do? Am I willing to kind of have those risks for something that I enjoy and actually like love doing? A lot of people get caught up in the like trying to figure out what the right path is. I think the beautiful thing about that is that like there's no two people in the world that takes the exact same path. We all have our own individual paths that we take, and it's at different times in our lives. You still have a voice, and it's your voice, and you have something to say, and there's always going to be people that are willing to like listen to that and accept that for what it is. And I just think that that's, a really beautiful journey that you can take and it still be yours, and you don't have to mold that to anything. The biggest thing you can do for yourself is just say yes and jump in and commit to being an artist. And once you have that commitment, I feel like there's no limitations after that.
Welcome to the Hearts to Hearts podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming and thank you for waiting for me. Marissa, you actually look, you just said, I'll tell you something. I said at the point we were talking. But when you said you had your exams, the grading and all of that. And at one point, I thought that you were still in college because that's how you look like. You look so young and fresh. And then you said, oh, you're teaching at, um, you know, the college and, all of that. So let me start by you look lovely and you look so fresh and radiant. Before we go into the conversation, I'm really looking forward. I'll tell you how I discovered your work. I remember, so on Arts to Arts project, we share other artists' works also on Instagram, and I think that's something I do myself. We have a system if we have someone else handling social media. So I make sure I share content and they can post it at a certain time or whatever. But for the past few months, it's myself handling all of this. And one day, so I have this group where, anytime I'm scrolling social media, I share people's work that I like. And when I want to share it, I pick one of the works that speaks to me at that moment and I share. And I remember one of your jar sculpture video, which I think had already gone viral or something. And I shared that and I was so stunned and I loved it. And then I think I went off to sleep and, whatever. And I also remember that I was so, I did it in such a hurry that I'd forgotten to tag you. And that's how our conversation started. But
That's
the
so
moment I
funny.
came back, yeah. And moment I came back and I realized, oh my God, I'd forgotten to tag you and whatever. But our feed was blown because people were like so much drooling over your work. So that's my first recall. But tell me, now I want to hear from you who you are. Can you introduce yourself a little bit? Not formally, but just, you know, for us to, everyone who's listening, for me to know you better. And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so just a little bit about myself. I'm actually from a really, really small town, still within the United States, but in a different state. And then I just moved to Oklahoma, which is where I'm at right now, 4 years ago. And I just moved here for grad school. So it's the first time I've ever moved away from home. So that was like a really big step for me. Yeah, so and I think that has a lot of information that kind of fills and fuels into the work that I'm doing. Um, it was one of those things where I didn't know what I was talking about, with my work. And I was like, with grad school, you're like, oh, they want that content and meaning behind the work. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so it was one of those things where it took a while, but I kind of realized that like that kind of absence of home or moving away from home was really what was starting to fuel the work. Um, and it really just kind of made me a little bit more connected to my work in that way. Like you were saying earlier about work kind of being an extension of yourself. That's kind of how I started looking at it. And then I kind of just like it's kind of cliche to say I became one with the work, but that's kind of how it started to kind of present itself to me once, I got halfway through grad school.
Oh, wow. And okay, can you tell me a little bit about before you're moving? Okay, let's also see. So your work is very influenced by domestic objects, and I love how you add those, the cable sweater networks and like the patches and the textures. And I'm somebody like who loves textures. But tell me something. Did your work always had association with something like this, or you were working very differently? Did your work how has it evolved over the time? Let's say.
Yeah, so honestly, I've only been doing clay for 6 years, so I haven't been doing
Oh,
it for
it's
very
not
long.
only.
Um, so in some sense, like 6 years seems like a long time, but
Yeah,
as I've gotten a little bit older, like the time passes really
very
quickly.
fun.
So
Yeah.
looking at it, I'm like, 6 years is not that long. Um, so I went to college to be an accountant
Oh my
and was
goodness.
doing, yeah, it was doing a lot of math and numbers. And I got to my junior year of college and decided, like, this is not what I want to be stuck doing for the rest of my life. Um, and I actually dropped out of college for 4 years and worked a lot of just, odd end jobs. And my dad is a woodworker, so he does
Oh,
cabinet and furniture, and he makes hardwood flooring and all of those things. And so I actually started kind of working with him when I was like 9 or 10 years old. And so I kind of got, in that routine of working with my hands and making things, but I never looked at it as an art form. I just saw it as like a craft, yes, but not
yeah.
necessarily like an art form. And I think that was just because of like my dad having that as, that was his job. That's what he did on a
Yeah,
daily basis. And so I just viewed that a little bit differently. But then once I dropped out of college, I was like, you know what? Like, I think that I am happier doing that, like something with my hands. So I went back to college and was like, I really want to, do something within the arts. I just didn't know what. And so
I can so relate.
yeah, and so I was like, I knew that that's what I wanted to do, but I just didn't know exactly what medium or what it was I wanted to do. So when I enrolled back into college, the only class that was left available because I enrolled so late was ceramics. And so it was just kind of like this nice little like accident that I ended up in the class and I didn't know what it was. So I mean, I showed up on the first day and they're like, "Here's your clay." And I was like, "What are we doing in this class?" And it was really funny at the time, but I look back at it and I was like, "Well, that's really nice that, like, I had no expectation, for what the class was gonna be, and then it, like, completely ended up, like, changing my career path and my life, and I just had this when I sat down with the first project, I had, like, this instant connection with the clay, and it was something that I had never felt doing anything else. So, I felt like that was, my that moment where it was like, "Okay, this is what I should be doing."
Were you able to relate, like seeing your father like working with wood as like, and then you working with your hands um with same material, like not same, the same process probably, like, the movement of hands and a material and shaping it and making not like something from nothing.
Yeah, like it's super relatable. And like no, it's not the same material, but like
Yeah,
I approach play in the same
yeah,
way that I do
yeah,
wood. Like the same like
yeah,
thinking process and like the forms of construction is all like very similar. And so that I think is a kind of what had that familiarity for me and kind of clicked into place and made a lot of sense to me. And so naturally, I just caught onto it very quickly.
yeah,
And I mean, it definitely doesn't hurt to like be good at what it is that you like to do. But yeah, so I started doing that and um when I was doing it in undergrad, I was stacking my classes. So I was taking all those classes very quickly. just so that I was like, I've already spent, I don't know, almost 4 years in college thinking I was going to do accounting. I was like, I don't want to spend another 4 years like trying to
Too
do
dookie.
ceramics. Right. So I was stacking all of my classes, and it wasn't until probably my last semester of undergrad that my work started kind of taking on its style and becoming something that wasn't just like random work that I was producing.
Yeah,
But but it was still, I would say, very tactile and had a
yeah,
little bit of texture and was still influenced by,
yeah,
domesticity, but not
yeah,
quite as much as it is now.
yeah.
It really took a turn once I got to grad school.
Tell me something. I really am interested in knowing about this because I think I have had a pretty similar journey as yours. Like, I didn't come from an art school. I actually did history and then find myself like trying a bunch of things, advertising, and then I was like, okay, I even then art never seemed like a possibility. So I was like, fashion has always been my calling. I want to do design, and I did fashion design. Did trend, and only then, a couple of years later, when I'd been working, and even though I was always in, then from that point I was always in the creative field. Um i for some reason, I mean, it was never an option to become an artist because it never seemed like a career. It always felt like, okay, it was a hobby, and I never had met a real artist in the sense of a working artist who could make a living out of their creativity. And also, I think the notions were very different for me at that point, and today I think very differently. And I really want to talk about that. Someone who has had, like, when you there is I've met people on the podcast who from the day one get go they got into the arts, they studied, all, they've had that journey which has been very consistent. And then there are stories like yours and mine, and there are more, but I'm just trying to pinpoint for what I can think of now. Where, you do a bunch of things, and I had the same sense of urgency like you did. And it was just that, oh, I've wasted this much time, I need to make the most of it, I need to go quicker and faster. And that there were a lot of more insecurities and inhibitions. Of course, there were a lot more strengths, and I want to speak about both. I'm sure because a lot of our listeners um, have the same paths. Like, for me, for say, one of my biggest fears was because I had moved so many different things. I would have this fear that I don't know if I would be able to stick to this or not. Because anytime you go deeper into something, you figure out, oh my God, this isn't what I thought it would be. What were your fears in the sense of, did you have any fears for the first? And if so, what were those?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of fears that arise when you decide, like, hey, I'm gonna pursue art because I know it's different, around the world and depending on like what kind of background you're coming from, but I didn't come from a lot of money. So, like the idea of like ending up not with a lot of money, I'm like, okay, well, I'm used to that, but it would be nice to be able to actually make money from what I'm doing. Right. So I'm not like struggling and finding myself in some like weird, strange situation where it's like, oh, like it's putting a lot of stress on me.
That means for you, the first association of being an artist was also the idea of starving artist, pursuing a, yeah. And most of us had that.
Yeah, I think it's a very common interpretation of, when someone talks about being an artist, like, is that you're poor? Like, that's the first thing you think of. And so, like, I had to sit down and ask myself, like, is this something that I could actually do and make a career out of? And I think at the end of the day, it was more so just like, is this what I want to do? Am I willing to kind of have those risks for something that I enjoy and actually like love doing? And I loved it enough that, that wasn't a big deal for me to like to turn me off and like make me go pursue something else. And, once I had decided, yes, this is what I want to do, I think I kind of just had a chat with myself and was like, like, this is what you're doing. There's no turning back. Like, you need to be motivated and dedicated to this and like make it work. And I think when you can do that for yourself and be kind of like your own motivation, it definitely makes things a lot easier.
What do you think was the pro or the advantage of not coming from a different background, let's say, um having, because I'll tell you, I've spoken about this also on the podcast a lot of times. I studied history, and then I did fashion and all of that. And when I decided to be an artist, every time I would move from one thing to another, I had this huge shame and guilt that the money, the effort and time I've put into something will be no longer of use. So I always thought, like, even though I did history and I studied and all of that, I felt like, oh my god, I'm no longer be able to use this. I mean, I've wasted my time. Oh my god. And then the bigger shock for me was when I actually wanted to do fashion. And when I closed that business, and I was like, oh my goodness, I spent a huge amount on my education, because like fashion and, like, art schools and design schools do not come cheap. And I had this huge guilt. Absolutely, it was a huge baggage. Like, I was like, I don't know, I mean, I had this huge shame and guilt that um I will let I the effort and the money and everything I'd put into it, it will no longer be of use. Little did I know that how limiting was my thought at that time. Today, I think history, which I had no idea ever I will be able to use in my life, has such a big impact on who I am, my work. Fashion informs so much of who I am, and every little thing that I've done so far. And I don't think I would have been where I am in my own creative path if I had not had those experiences, because they have literally been the biggest, like, parts of my existence. Do you think you've had anything that that has so much shaped who you are today?
Oh yeah, definitely. I I mean, I get what you're saying completely about the, like, I feel like I wasted my time and my money with this, and then I'm, like, changing my mind and going over here. I think it's completely normal to kind of have those feelings because, I mean, it's essentially life is a race against the clock, unfortunately, and it seems like.
But it's a self time clock. It's not like somebody's put us. I was thinking this. So I'm turning 30 this year. I mean, this year, what, I'm in a few days actually. And I'm like, it's like, I don't feel that rush in me. I really don't. But when I see people around me with, like, they want to see, oh, checklist before 30 and, like, all of this, and I feel like so much, and I think social media has a lot to do with that. I'm not an extrovert. So I mean, my contact with people is very limited and is very contextual about work and all of that. But sometimes social media really takes a toll on you. Like, I will be doing fine and great well one day, and I look at someone and I'm like, I don't think I mean, I know I wasn't a part of that race, but I start to question myself, like, should I be worried about this? Am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? And, like, it's not like somebody's it's yeah, we when we were younger, I think it was a lot more different because we didn't have autonomy over our own decisions. As adults today, it's not like anybody's going to pitch us if we choose to eliminate ourselves from something, or if we choose to be a certain way. And I think you would relate to this because I grew up in a small town, and you just mentioned that you also come. So when I moved to the bigger city, I can see the difference in me being from a smaller town and being from a bigger city. I see that difference. I see the perspective difference, and I see the stability, and I see how I behave. Like, so it's like you said, like, we feel like we're on a clock, but are we? I mean, I feel like we aren't really, but we want to put ourselves on a clock. I don't know. Maybe it gives us thrill, or I don't know.
Well, like you said with the whole social media thing, I think it's just like us putting ourselves in these boxes of like what we feel like society says is appropriate for the time being, right? And so, like I'll be 32 this year, and honestly, like my
You still
20s,
look like
the whole
16.
time, I know. I'm hoping my face just stays this way for the rest of my life.
You really look 16.
it's really funny when I go in to teach my classes, they don't know, like, that I'm the professor, and so they're like, "Are they not coming?" And I'm like, "I'm right here. You're just all larger than I am." But,
Okay.
yeah, I think that when we're looking at, it's really hard because social media is such a prominent thing, and, like, social media drives me crazy, but it's also, like, the only way that I can get my work out there for, like, people outside of where I'm at to be able to see,
Yeah.
like, what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And because, I mean, like, you wouldn't have seen my work if
Yeah.
I hadn't have posted it,
Absolutely.
you know? And so it's like, how do you post and get your work out there, but then, like, not look and compare yourself to everything else that's being put out there. And so I had a really hard time with that in my 20s, just even when I was, trying to decide if I was going to grad school or what it was I was doing for my career and my life. And I was like, well, what if I want to have a family? What if I want to get married? What if it was like all of these what ifs. And it was like, well, this is the time frame I'm supposed to do it
Yeah.
in. And then, like,
Supposed to. Yeah.
yeah, and it took me several years, like, the whole time I was in grad school of me just, like, dissecting, what I wanted my work to be about and, like, who I was as a person, for me to realize, like, no, like, I get to decide those things. I don't There's not, like, this rule book that I'm having to play by, like, that's just something that, society has made up that we're supposed to, like, fall into this trap. But, I'm trying really hard to just, kind of do what's best for me at the time and not try to make all these lifelong plans because, like, I'm trying to, like, live in the now, and see how that takes me through the world. But
You know, I really liked what you said because I do agree. Like I have a very similar situation with social media, but also how I've been thinking a lot about it. Um, I, as an artist myself, I have figured this out that I cannot run on, the trend wheel. And because I have so many things in my life, like even as a part of my own job, I just do not have the bandwidth to, like, put so much effort into. I really want to put whatever effort I have into my work more than, you know, sh- putting it on social media and like the way I put it. And also, I think something feeling like it's not my authentic voice. It's not who I am. I've never been someone who's driven by trends or like faster. And, I've been always questioning, even with building my own practice, building arts to hearts in my own life, how do we build it in a more sustainable way? Like, how do I not feel that pressure of being on a wheel and yet, keep growing? Like, and I think it has a lot to do with like expectations. And I think this also happened with my own work. So before my mother's passing away, I think I was this person who felt like, oh, my work, I had to find something in my work. It had to be like this, or, like the certain, like the pressure that we feel like our work has to stand out. And like, after my mother's passing away, I think my biggest lesson, and I struggled a lot with, was, letting go. Um, Accepting, like, things, because it was such a big shock of life. And it made me realize, like, at some point there are things that they're going to have with their own timing. They will have their own reasons, and I may not have a lot of control over them. So I will have to accept sometimes life as is and embrace it. And that changed a lot of things for me with my own work. I stopped forcing, and I just started following, you know whatever I felt. And believe me, I feel like you said, I've never felt more one with my work. And all of those times where I knew nothing what I was doing, where it was going, I just kept on going because I was like, if I try to hold it too much, I mean, it's not going to work. I tried that. I tried that in my life. And once I let go of my mother in the sense of a physical being, I started to feel like it just got easier for me to let go of everything else. And when I let that go, I just followed wherever my heart and soul or whatever it was that was guiding me. And things started to come together on its own. And I think even though it feels like a very hard process, in a lot of places, like, I mean, I no longer have an expectation of my video going viral, or I have to have thousands of followers. And you know I'm like, if it's meant to happen, it's going to happen. I can't push myself or hold that expectation, so I need to have this, like, you know
No, that makes total sense. I mean, I think that that's something like when I first started doing social media, I was so caught up in the like, oh, how do I make my videos go viral? How do I post this and post that? What's the right content? But it was such like a struggle of it was like I would look at my Instagram feed and like, okay, like this isn't even me. Like I don't know like what I'm doing at this point. But then it's like once I went through grad school and I keep referring back to that because they drill you on like, your work needs to be authentic, it needs to be you, but I was like, I'm trying to build this platform, but it's not authentic, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, absolutely. Something, you know that's I really want to share one more incident. Like, this is something that I realized. So I have intentionally cut down a lot of my own, like, not cut down in the sense of maybe sharing, and like, I try to do it when I feel ease of it. But I figured that it wasn't just my art, but the way I do business, what I want to do in life. When I consume too much and I see things around too much, even though there is no intention of me being influenced, I still get influenced. My my actions change, my expectations change a lot of times. And I did that a couple of times, and I made that mistake. And I realized that had I been doing this, if I had not seen someone, or maybe had that influence, and I figured that now it's a practice. Anytime I'm doing something specifically, in my art, I think for me it's easier with my art now, because anything that feels difficult, in the sense of, okay, this isn't, if my instinct is not responding, I put it, park it there. I'm like, when it will, I will come back to it. But let's say with business, I will keep questioning, do I want to do this because this is me? Or do I want to do this because for some way reason I've seen this around me and I feel like I need to do this too? And I felt like this had so much influence on me, like even with my own art career. I think I at a lot of, I just did my solo show, and I per se, I didn't I a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves, and goals we put ourselves with social media. It's like, is it coming from you, or is it coming from what you saw around you and you felt like you had to do this too?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I think it's hard to kind of find the distinction between the two. Like that is a very
Yeah, it's
blurry
really
line
hard.
in between.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
so, I mean, I like to believe that it gets easier as you get older and kind of like start to figure out yourself a little bit more. At least for me, I think, because I mean, I've started like going back to what you were saying, like I have started like kind of, I guess, eliminating these like toxic relationships and
Yeah,
different things in my life that doesn't kind of line up with what I'm wanting for myself or like morals or if it's something that doesn't make me happy, I'm like, okay, well, we just need to get rid of that.
yeah,
Because essentially like my work, yes, it is inspired by, domestic spaces and comfort, but it's also like the idea of like connection and like these joyful like smaller moments in life. And
yeah,
so I've recently just been trying to really like hone in on that and like create those smaller like joyful moments for myself. And
yeah,
so a lot of that comes from just like trying to get rid of those toxic relationships and not so happy situations that we often find ourselves in, and just seeing like life a little bit more simply. And I think
yeah.
that that like has been working recently for me. I'm just hoping it kind of keeps that trend.
No, I'm sure it will. Okay, tell me something. Another thing that I feel like want to ask you. I haven't asked this really anybody yet. For me, um, I feel like growing up in a small town has had a huge impact,
Mhm.
and I think it informs so much of my work today, and I know that for you too. you know. So I will break this question into two parts. One, how has your own journey of yourself, like we said, we're an extension of who we are. Our art is an extension of who we are. So how has you've also moved, you stayed your whole life in, into a smaller town, and then, being exposed and being on your own in a bigger city. How has that transition felt? How has that impacted your work? And then we'll talk about you making a work that, has an influence of being in a smaller town, more domestic life, and those influences.
Yeah, so it affected me, like, at the beginning, I really didn't think it was that big of a deal. Um, when I was moving, I had lived in the same town. My entire family was 15, 20 minutes away from one another. Like everyone, my grandmother, my cousins, like everyone lived that close together. And we had always lived like that. So when I decided to move, I had moved, it was for an internship right after I graduated. So I graduated and moved like 3 days later, like packed up everything from my house, shoved it into my car, and just like was like, "Bye, I'll see you later," because I was like, "Yeah, getting out of here." Like, but when you're used to being that close to friends and family for 28 years, it really has like a larger impact on you. You start to look at things differently. And you start to realize that like some of those things you took for granted and didn't realize. Because it's nice just being able to like call your mom and be like, "Hey, let's go get lunch," or "Hey, dad, let me come help you at work." And those things I quickly realized like weren't going to be part of my daily routine anymore. And so, I mean, I think that that had a huge impact. And it was like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do now? Like, sure, it had an impact in that way where it made me emotional and it made me like miss home, but it was also like a really big stepping stone for me, like figuring out who I was as a person because I didn't have that to fall back on.
Yeah, I get that. Like, I totally agree, because I think it's such a symbiotic relationship. Um, it reminds me who I am,
Hmm.
specifically when you go out. I've been staying away. I've built an entire life for the past 10 years from somewhere I didn't come from. So that gave me an exposure of really who I am. I I wasn't defined by where I come from, in the sense of, my family, or I could, and also like, it's not like it's also necessity that shapes you, but it's also you undiscover, like, how far can you go, who can you be, who you are. But then also another relationship with, you become someone because time needs you. And when you move, and you live a life, and you always want to come back to the place and roads to remind you who you are, or the sense of who you are. Do you feel that way anyway? Because that's what nostalgia is in our work.
Right. And I think that that's why, because all of this was happening right before I went to grad school, when they kept telling me, like, what is your work about? And I was like, I didn't have answers to those questions. And they just kept telling me to be authentic. And so I really had to sit down and like, it was ridiculous, but I had to sit down with like my sketchbook and I was like, who are you? Like written on paper, and like would put bullet points of like just like different words I would use to describe myself, and then things that I enjoyed that like truly made me happy, and then like different emotions that I would feel each day. And then it was almost like a word journal. And then
Yeah.
after a while, I would just see like which words just kept popping up. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's what my work should be about. And so a lot of it came back to just, the feelings that I had when I was leaving home, and then, what it was that I enjoyed about home and those connections I was making with those people. And that's essentially like what led to the work that I'm doing now. And I mean, I feel like that's probably true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Just they come into like what their work is about in weird ways. but
Yeah.
you really have to like sit down and ask yourself like who you are as a person before you can kind of feel like your work is an extension of yourself.
Yeah. And I think this has so much to do with self. I remember when I started my journey, I was like, I will never become like, I would never make Indian art or like, and I wasn't like, even though it was my culture and everything I was so much a bigger part of, like, it influenced me so much. I never had enough acceptance and I never embraced the fact of how much it meant to me. And I was like, I always thought, okay, oh no, I wouldn't. I mean, I would make something different and, all of that. But when I went out and the more farther I went, I realized that I was missing that part of me and I started embracing it. And I started to embrace myself, my culture, my roots, my upbringing, my growing up coming from a smaller town, and all those things that maybe I didn't wear as a pride at before became a badge of honor for me. I started to embrace that, and it completely changed me. It completely changed my work for the good. And I feel like, I don't know if you've had that kind of an experience, because once for me, when got into the city, in a bigger city, and or from X background to went into the arts, I feel like I had to be a certain way. I had to fit in. I had to, like, and that meant, I, of course, when you're new into something, you do not understand that you can just be yourself and find your way in the existing system to be yourself, or that you don't have to necessarily fit in. But when you're coming from a very different place, you feel like you have to fit in to be, a part of something. And I realized, like, I tried so hard and I was like, chuck it, I don't want to fit in any longer. I really want to be who I am. And that's when I started to make a place of my own. Did you feel any way like that?
Yes, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I feel like that was like a huge part of it. So I grew up in Alabama, which is very, very south in the United States, and there's a lot of like stereotypes of just like southern states being like uneducated and things like that, which, like growing up in that, it made me really, I don't want to say ashamed, but like not proud
Yeah,
of
yeah.
being from
Yeah,
Alabama.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely, I
so it
get
was
that.
kind of, yeah, it was the feeling of like, well, good, like I want to go somewhere else. Like I
Yeah.
don't want to be stuck here forever.
Or
But then
that
it
you
was
you
also
feel
like,
like you were different.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I had that feeling along with like being where I would help my dad at work, right? So
Yeah.
I would go to work with him and build cabinets and do flooring and build furniture. And like there was always the question of like, they would like look at me weird, like when we were
Yeah.
at customers' houses and they're like, why didn't you bring your son
Yeah.
with you? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, just because I'm a girl doesn't mean
Girl.
that I can't do
Yeah.
these
Can't
things
do
too.
this. Yeah.
Right. And so I felt like I was always in this state of needing to prove myself to someone like, yes, I'm a girl, but I can do this. Or yes, I might be from the South, but I'm not stupid. And so it was always just this need to prove myself. And so
Yeah.
I feel like there for a while it just made me like not really like that part of myself. But
Yeah.
then once
I
I
get that.
moved away, I realized that those traits were what made me different and
Yeah.
like gave me something to like give the world kind of thing.
Yeah. I like that.
Um, and so it took me moving away to really appreciate those things.
Yeah. And had you not been, let's say, a woodworker's daughter, had you not been going to work with him, probably your work wouldn't have been the same that it is today. Probably wouldn't have felt the same way that you're doing today. Like for me,
Oh, definitely not.
I hadn't grown in a smaller town like I did, if I hadn't had a mom who would go to like different tailors and people and thrift things and put things together, and like, or if I didn't grown up in India, or like all of these things, my, who I am, my work, none of this would have made sense, because it's all it all came together when I started to embrace those parts of who I am and to share that stories and to relive those moments and realize like how little they were, but how much bigger they meant. Like Now, when I look back, I know what it meant to me and how it shaped me as a child. So yeah, I mean, it's I really want to say, and I really loved our conversation this way because we get a lot of questions. Um, People ask, okay, am I, I am 60 plus, I'm an elderly woman, or I'm a middle-aged woman who started into the arts now, or I come from this, or I come from that. And I feel like all of us have our own ways and reasons of how we fit in and how we don't fit in, of who we are and who we are not. But the beauty I feel is just who we are. It's not like that we all have to be the same. And the problem I think is that we all sometimes I think we pretend to be the same, but the more different we are, the more we speak about our own journeys, the more we want to do things our way, it becomes so much more inclusive and brings inclusivity. And anyone who's listening to this, I don't know if you come from a smaller town or a different city or a small country, there is always a possibility. There is no limit. You can make your own definitions. Today, I'm sitting in India. I run an international business. I'm an artist, but I also run a business. I have a gallery. I have a podcast. And the way I see Arts to Hearts or this podcast or my creative practice, I look at it very differently than what people say you're supposed to. So like I really want to send out this message and thank you so much for sharing with us, Marisa, because the essence and the beauty of who we are is I think the most magical thing as artists we have. Because imagine like if you look at yourself today, like how have you, your own journey so far, your own unique journey, have translated into something so unique and different. And we all have our own stories and we all have our own journeys. And how, if we process that through a magic of creativity, how we can all put it into something out in the world, like your gift to the world.
Yeah, and I think, I think that a lot of people get caught up in the like trying to figure out what the right path is.
Yeah,
And it's like what is the way to, point X, Y, or Z. And I think the beautiful thing about that is that there's no two people in the world that takes the exact same path. We
yeah,
all have our own individual paths that we take, and it's at different times in our lives. And
yeah,
so I think, especially with art, like there's so many people that, are introduced to art. Either they come into art, like we were talking about earlier, maybe it was something they were brought up with. They come into it in their 30s. You could come into art when you're like 70 or 80. And
yeah.
like nice is like you still have a voice and it's your voice and you have something to say, and there's always going to be people that are willing to like listen to that and accept that for what it is. And I just think that that's, a really beautiful journey that you can take and it still be yours, and you don't have to mold that to anything.
I love that. Thank you so much, Marisa. I know it's been long. And before I let you go, I have a small rapid fire for you. Are you ready?
Yeah, of course I
Okay.
am.
Okay. Let's start with one, two, three. What inspired you to become an artist?
I think just the idea of being able to be free with expression and be who I am without restrictions.
I love that. What has been the best piece of advice you've been given by another artist?
I would say best piece of advice would be to continue working and not be afraid of failure.
Yeah, I love that. Um, what has been the biggest challenge you have faced in your own creative career?
Definitely finding my voice as an artist. There's so many stereotypes in the world, and trying to figure that out is a lot of pressure. So
Yeah.
it's just being able to like let go of all of that and then understand who you are as a person.
Are you a morning person or a late night? Which is your preferred time of creating?
Morning, 100%.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, I'm definitely a morning person.
Music or silence? What's your preferred way of creating?
Music.
Okay.
Music for sure.
Inspiration or hard work? What's your key to success?
Ooh, can it be 50-50? I
I
feel
think
like
so.
both are so important.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Okay, what advice would you give to anyone who's listening to this episode right now? Um, as an artist, as I think I'd love to hear your advice specifically in context to your own journey, someone who comes from a place like you. And I really, really deeply wanted to ask you this because, you know, sometimes it's just one a pat on the back for someone like you where you can see yourself into someone. That person's telling you, if I did it, so can you. Go get it. Like it that can give you a kick in the world that nobody else can give you. So what's your advice to anyone who's listening to this and looks up to you and relates to your journey?
I think the biggest piece of advice would just be just honestly like get up and do it. I think that for me, a lot of times I would be like, oh, I'll get to it tomorrow, or maybe next week we'll do this. But if you keep saying that, like tomorrow and next week is never going to get here.
Yeah.
And, taking that leap into art, if you're wanting to be an artist or pursue that, I think that that's a really big leap to take. And I get that there's a lot of insecurities and fear behind that. But I think like the biggest thing you can do for yourself is just say yes and jump in and commit to being an artist. And once you have that commitment, I feel like there's no limitations after that.
I love that. Thank you so much, Marisa. And before I let you go, anyone who's interested in following you, where can they find you, support you? And if you have anything coming up that you'd like to share with us, please take the stage and we're all ears.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Marissa_ceramics. And also at my website is just marissachilders.com. And then I've got a lot of exciting things coming up for the next year, tons of workshops and solo shows and a residency that I will be at for the next 11 months. So I feel like I'm going to be like on the go constantly. So that will be a really fun, interesting journey to kind of travel along
Nice.
with.
I love that. Make sure you share the details with us so that we can cheer for you and share it with the community. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope to see you soon again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.